What your body does in the 4 minutes after you die. At some point, your heart is going to stop. Not today, probably. Not soon, hopefully. But at some point, the muscle that has been contracting roughly 100,000 times every single day since before you were born is going to stop. And in the silence after that last beat, something is going to happen. Something that almost nobody talks about. Because most of us assume we know what death is. An off switch. You're here, and then you're not. The monitor flatlines. The room goes still. And that's the end of the story. But that's not what the science says. Death is not a moment. It's a process. And that process is stranger, more ordered, and more unsettling than almost anything you have ever been told. Not spiritually, not philosophically, biologically. In the 4 minutes after your heart stops, it goes through a sequence. And understanding that sequence changes everything you think you know about where life ends and death begins. Let's start with what death actually is, because it turns out that's not a simple question. There are 3 different definitions of death, and they don't all happen at the same time. The first is clinical death. This is the moment your heart stops beating and your breathing stops. Oxygen delivery to the brain and organs ceases. But clinical death is not the end. It is the beginning of a window that modern medicine has learned to reach inside of. Clinical death is reversible. We call it resuscitation. The second definition is brain death. This is when the brain itself loses all measurable activity. The point at which, by every legal and medical standard, the person is gone. But here's what almost nobody tells you. Even brain death is not when your cells die. The third definition is biological death. In the first 10 seconds after your heart stops, the brain begins to lose consciousness. The oxygen already dissolved in your blood is consumed almost immediately. Neurons start firing erratically, something researchers did not expect at all. In 2013, a team of neuroscientists at the University of Michigan recorded the brain activity of dying rats. The rats showed a massive surge of coordinated brain activity. The high-frequency brainwave patterns spiked to levels significantly higher than anything recorded during normal waking consciousness, firing harder and faster than it ever had while alive. Borjagin's team published their findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The biological storm happening in the brain at the moment of death lasts for up to 30 seconds after the heart has already stopped. Between 1 and 2 minutes, the electrical activity begins to slow. By around 2 minutes after cardiac arrest, most measurable brain activity has ceased. This is the moment most people would call death. But the body has not received that message yet. At the 2 to 4 minute mark, cellular death is only just beginning, and it does not happen all at once. It happens in a sequence determined entirely by how much oxygen each tissue requires to keep functioning. Your brain cells are the most oxygen-hungry structures in your entire body. They begin to die within 4 to 6 minutes of losing blood flow. This is the window. The survival rate drops by 7 to 10% for every minute without resuscitation. But your heart muscle cells can survive for up to 20 minutes. Your kidneys can last 30 to 40 minutes after blood flow stops. Your liver can function for an hour or more after the moment of clinical death. Corneal cells, the transparent tissue at the front of your eyes, remain viable for up to 12 hours after death. This is why corneas can be donated hours after a person has passed. Skin cells can survive for up to 24 hours. Bone cells have been successfully harvested and used in transplants up to 72 hours after death. 3 days after a person dies, there are still living cells in their body. In 2014, Dr. Sam Parnia at New York University published the results of the AWARE study. AWARE stood for Awareness During Resuscitation. His team monitored 2,060 patients who experienced cardiac arrest across 15 hospitals in the United Kingdom, the United States, and Austria. 39% of the patients who survived reported some form of awareness during the period when they were clinically dead. Some described moving through darkness toward light. Some described watching their own resuscitation from a vantage point outside their body. One patient accurately described in verifiable detail the specific actions of the nurses during his resuscitation. The relationship between brain function and consciousness is not as straightforward as science assumed. The line between life and death may not be where we put it. We define death because we had to. Death is not an event. It is a process of disassembly. Some parts of you persisting long after the part of you that thinks and remembers and experiences the world has gone dark. So when does a person actually end? When the heart stops? When the brain goes silent? When the last surviving cell in a 3-day-old body finally runs off the fuel? There is no clean answer. And the closer science looks at the concepts, the less clean it becomes. The minutes after your heart stops are not empty. Your brain fires harder than it ever has. Your cells begin a slow, staggered retreat at different rates. Parts of you keep working long past any point you would recognize as alive. And somewhere inside that window, the thing you experience as yourself fades, more like a signal losing strength, stretching thin across the noise, until at some point, it is gone. Every person who has ever lived has gone through this, and so will you. Not as a horror, not as a comfort exactly, just as a fact. The most universal human experience is the one we understand least. And the more science looks directly at it, the more it becomes clear that death is far stranger and far more extraordinary than we ever thought to ask.